Hello, I'm Congressman Steve Cohen, and I'm back. Back in terms of being reelected, but also back on legislative report. You know, we had to come off last March because it was in 3 months of the primary election, and then the general was in 3 months of that. So because of equal play and fairness that the library has to opposition, we've been off the air for 6 months. But it's good to be back with you, and it's good to be reelected as your 9th District Congressman. We have as our guests and kind of a roundtable discussion, on my left, John Merrick, an attorney and my campaign manager during this past year, and an avid Democrat and student of government who also served as an intern when I was in the state Senate. So he's come a long way, and I've seen him mature and grow and graduate from University of Memphis, but get both a master's degree and a law degree at the same time and pass his bar exam. So John, welcome to Congressional Report.
Thank you.
And Randy Wade, my district director and old friend, good friend, old's not a good word at these times.
So I'll accept old.
good friend, and Shellback, Navy veteran.
Go Navy.
And so we're back, and
That's right,
Randy,
back.
It's good to have you on the show.
Very kind, thank you. Good.
We've been gone from the show for a while, and I did want to talk about a little bit about what went on. I guess one thing I wanted to especially focus on was a bill I supported toward the end of the session that I thought was important, and I'm going to encourage Chairman Lamar Smith, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, for at least the end of this Congress, to reintroduce, if he can, or try to pass again. And that was a bill to change immigration and make some immigration movement, and allow for graduate students who come to this country and get their degrees, graduate degrees in our country, to be allowed first shot at immigration. And that if they have gotten their degree in the STEM program, science, technology, engineering, or math, which we need people in those areas to be entrepreneurs to help our economy, if we educate them, we certainly should not send their talent back to wherever they came from. And many of these are Indians, many are Chinese, many are Pakistani, but they're from all over the world. And we can use their talents here. And so I was proud to support the bill on the floor.
Right.
Was one of the 30 Democrats that broke party lines and supported it. But it needed 2/3 because Chairman Smith brought it up under suspension. We need to bring it up under regular rules and pass it.
What's the chances of getting that passed now after the election?
Well, I would hope it'd be better. The problem, once a bill's come up under suspension, I believe it can come up and go through the regular process. I'm concerned a little bit that maybe Chairman Smith did it only as a political tool to try to say that the Republicans were trying to do something about immigration and the Democrats weren't. Because he never asked me for my vote. I voted for it because it was the right thing to do, and I'm friends with Chairman Smith. And I went up to him before the vote and I said, I heard Howard Berman's going to vote for this. He said he is. I said, well, you know, I think I'm going to vote for it too. And he said, thank you. But he never asked me for my vote, even when I came to him and asked him about Berman, which made me think that it was more of a show and not an effort to pass, because he could have got it through committee as chairman without any trouble, and then it would have just taken a majority. So I don't know how serious he is about it, but I'd like to see it pass.
He should be serious about it, because I was listening to CNN, John, and they stated that 50,000 Hispanics a day graduate from high school. So the chance may be pretty good.
But we're talking about graduate school. We're not talking about graduating high school. We're talking about people that come here and graduate, get master's degrees or PhDs or MDs.
Good bill.
And those people, we educate them. That's keys to the future of our economy.
No doubt about it, no doubt.
So I'm going to call Lamar and urge him to bring the bill through the regular process and try to help him. There was a lot of Democrats weren't for it, and I understand the reason they weren't, but it was the right thing to do. And this is one of the things we voted on. And we work well with our Republican colleagues. I think I've got as many, if not more, friends across the aisle than most. And Lamar's my chairman, and we've been close. In fact, he had a bill that he passed, and he wanted to change the sponsor and make me the sponsor because he knew I'd done some work on it and we were close, but he couldn't do it because of the rules. So that was kind of that situation. In the campaign, John, it was an interesting experience, of course. Good to have it over with. There were some things that came up about my record as a congressman that bothered me. We decided to stay positive in our campaign. Randy, you've been up to Washington. You know how much I try to vote, how anxious I am to vote.
I'm there with you most of the time. And a lot of people doesn't understand how that works. When I was there several times with you, I mean, you may have 5, 6, 7 votes to hit you rapidly. You go on the phone, you're talking to other congressmen, you're trying to work it out, and then you may miss a vote. But it's not a vote that really affect
the final outcome.
Right, exactly right.
And I had missed 133 votes. That's accurate.
Yeah, but
that's out of 5,000 votes over 6 years, and of those votes, 20 were when I came back to be with my mother when she was dying.
Well, we called you and told you you needed to get back.
And I came back on December 7th, and my mom passed. It was just after that, and that's 20 votes. But for those 20 votes, instead of being 2.6% of votes missed, I'd have had 2.1%, and instead of being in the middle of Congress, I'd have been in the upper part of Congress for attendance. Not everybody loses their mother, and you'd come home for that. And there were votes when I stayed home for Ben Hooks' funeral.
That's right.
There were votes when I came home for my good friend Thomas Boggs' funeral. Those were 11 votes. Almost 10% of the votes I missed. One of my best friends in a funeral in Memphis. And I talked to one of my colleagues, and he said, "You'll never regret going home for a friend's funeral. You'll always regret that, You'll never regret missing these 11 votes, which were not important that day. There were not any major votes." But the implication was that I had missed votes because of going off on government paid for, taxpayer funded trips. Well, that year in particular, I went on no government trips. I had not gone to Iraq or Afghanistan that year. There were no government. In fact, one of the trips that I went on was with you, Randy.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We went to Rwanda and also the Congo, but it wasn't by taxpayers' dollars.
It was CARE.
It was CARE, matter of
and
fact.
And the Gates Foundation.
The Gates, Bill and Belinda Gates, they sponsored a grant to CARE so we can make that trip. And we were gone for, I think, 7 days.
And none of them were during session.
Oh, no.
Never did I miss a vote.
And those trips are not, John, vacations.
No.
You work. You work, and when you get back, you have to make that report to the House of Representatives. You have to make that report.
And we went to a place called Goma in the Congo.
Yeah.
Was that the most depressing, sad place you'd ever seen in your life?
I promise, it really was. When the refugees there on a volcanic rock mountain, so to speak, and no water, food. I mean, it was deplorable.
No running water. They had the food, and they had to go out and get sticks to make fires. And the women were oftentimes raped when they went out to get the sticks. And I asked, why don't the men go get the sticks? And they said, well, that's not a man's job.
And not only
sounds like they should have been running for Congress, for the Senate in Missouri.
Well, that definitely doesn't sound like a vacation to me. And I think with the negative attack ads that he had, I think it tells us two things. First of all, when that's what he's going after and when we're basically able to pick it apart piece by piece, it shows that he really didn't have anything to attack you on your record. That's number one. Number two, I mean, this is something you see on a national scale. I mean, you see basically when somebody is behind, they're going to try to go negative. And we just had to do the best we could to make sure the truth and the facts were straight and overcome the what was it, 2 or 3 to 1 margin of spending that was working against us in that race.
Well, but I just wanted to, people know, I think, that I make an extra effort to make every vote and would never miss a vote, and that's why I got upset, because I pride myself on my work ethic and my integrity, and I would never miss a vote for a travel, and never miss a vote unless it was some really great reason. And you know, when you're flying from Memphis to Washington and 16 votes were missed because the plane was late or the plane was canceled, and I think some people have experience with Delta Airlines. Delta, some say, stands for doesn't even leave the Airport, Delta.
Your record and reputation speaks for itself. I think with the negative ads, it backfired, no doubt about it.
Let's talk about the historic election of President Obama.
Oh, now.
Now, that's a second term for President Barack Obama. What's the first thing, John, the first issue that comes to your mind that his election will make a total difference in?
The Supreme Court. I mean,
and tell us about why that's going to happen.
Well, we have, right now, we have Ginsburg, and we have a few others that are getting a little bit up there in age. And if Mitt Romney would have been elected, that would have meant that the court, which currently, I would say it slightly leans right.
It's 5-4.
It's 5-4, because Kennedy's he's a moderate, but he leans towards the right. But right now it's 5-4, and if he would have gotten to put, it would have been at least, I would say, 1 and possibly even 2 or 3 Supreme Court justices up there. We would have lost complete control. I mean, the Supreme Court, whether we like it or not, is determined by the people the president chooses to nominate, and with a lot of Romney-nominated judges on that bench, we would have gone back in time. It would have been a time warp back to the 1950s.
It would have been a time warp, and I remember in the 2000 convention, Narrow said that it had a button. Everybody probably knows I collect buttons, but it's about the Supreme Court, stupid, and that was kind of a play on the Clinton team that said it's about the economy, stupid, and it turned out very much to be about the Supreme Court in 2000. Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court 5-4 decided Bush became president, not Gore, even though Gore would have really won Florida and should have been president. But neither here nor there. The Supreme Court means so much, and the nominees would have had Roe v. Wade in their sights, and if Romney would have appointed 1 or 2 more Supreme Court justices, there's a goodly likelihood that they would have found a way to have overruled Roe v. Wade, a woman's right to choose and person's right to privacy, as in Griswold v. Connecticut.
And one of the biggest issues to me, period, in this country right now is that awful decision that was handed down during the last term of Citizens United, and I think that has to be our biggest concern. The fact that corporations and anybody can just dump millions and billions of dollars, like what was his name, Sheldon Adelson,
and the Koch brothers, and others,
and it's really dangerous for our elections and our country. And the only 2 ways to get rid of Citizens United are either A, through constitutional amendment, which we know how difficult that would be on a national level, or B, a new Supreme Court that would actually revisit the issue. And with President Obama getting reelected, I think we have a chance at hopefully getting a new decision on that issue.
And Randy, other than the Supreme Court, and that's major, and there's all kind of things the Supreme Court will deal with besides women's rights and speech rights and Citizens United, Buckley v. Vallejo. What was another issue that President Obama's election is going to mean to this country?
I think the fiscal cliff. I think the budget. I think that it's going to be. I mean, we got to face it. I mean, we can't continue to spend the way we're going. We got to face the fact that there's going to be some major cuts, and that's where you and some of the other progressive members of Congress really have to step in.
And as a man, let me ask you this on a personal basis. You've lost some weight lately, haven't you?
35 pounds.
And how did you do that? Did you cut out some food?
Yes, bread. I don't eat bread. Laid back on the sweets. Cokes, and matter of fact, you told me that.
And did you start to exercise more too?
Walk 2 miles every other day.
And that's what I've done.
Right.
To lose weight, to tighten up on your physical budget.
That's right.
You've got to both exercise and cut back on your intake. And it's the same thing with the fiscal budget.
That's right.
You've got to increase your revenue and cut back on your expenses.
That's right.
It's the same and Bill Clinton did it. You know about Bill Clinton's work.
I know about Bill Clinton.
And that's what he did in the 90s. He balanced the budget by increasing
the revenue.
The revenues and decreasing the cuts. And it was a combination that he passed a budget balanced bill and got a surplus. And then of course after Bush came in 2001, he took the surplus and gave it out in the Bush tax cuts. Now we have the issue about the Bush tax cuts, and they will expire at the end of this year, part of the fiscal cliff. If we don't do something, the Bush tax cuts will all expire, and there will be an increase in taxes on everyone.
Everybody. That's right.
But if we act as the president has suggested, and I recommend, and increase taxes, or basically just don't allow the Bush tax cuts to continue for the wealthiest, upper 1 or upper 2%, then we can have some area of compromise. To date, the Republicans, in a pledge to Grover Norquist, have refused to have any income, any revenue. And they were refusing, they're holding basically hostage everybody whose income is $200,000 single or less, or $250,000 married and less. Their tax cuts that everybody agrees we should give, and continue the Bush tax cuts for those people because it's good for the economy, et cetera. And because of their desire to give continued Bush tax cuts to people making over $250,000, the other people might not get them. And that's where we are. It's kind of like playing chicken. And they're holding hostage everybody's tax cuts of under $250,000 for those over $250,000.
One thing that really bothered me on the campaign trail, and this is something I get all the time, is people tried to accuse President Obama of not working with the other side enough. He bent over backwards to work with the other side. I mean, we gave up on the public option, something that really should have been in that health care law.
That was part of the Affordable Care Act.
Part of that was, and we compromised, and we took, when you talked about this at a mental health
program at the
University of Memphis, where we basically took, an idea that came from Mitt Romney and Bob Dole and said, well, okay, you're disagreeing with us on a national health care system and other things that we want, but let's compromise. And we offered them their own legislation that they supported. Jim DeMint, there's a video of him on 2008 saying that he thinks that Mitt Romney's health care bill would be a model for the nation. And this is, Jim DeMint's one of the head Tea Party people. So we've gone to the middle. And speaking of which, with the budget, President Obama and the Democrats, they offered up a deal, trying to make a budget deal, with 83% spending cuts and only 17% revenue increases. The Republicans wouldn't agree with that. When they had the presidential debate in the primary, they were all asked on stage. I believe John Huntsman even went along with this. I hope not, but
I think they all did.
They all said it.
$10 in. Would you take $1 in revenue for $10 in cuts? And not a one of them would agree to that.
No.
None of them would be for any revenue at all.
So,
and you've got to have both.
Well, the American people, they've spoken. All right, they want to see Congress come together. They want to see each party reach across the aisle. It's because it's about the American people, the betterment of our country, America. And the president said, we're all the one. We're one big family. But lately, we've not been working together as a family. And I think that's why we're in the situation we're in now, that we're going to have to come together. We're going to have to work. They're going to have to cross lines. I was listening to Speaker Boehner, and he basically said that they're ready to talk. But he also said that the deal, that if you all can reach a deal, that it has to be the right deal. And of course, you're saying basically the same thing on the other side. So it has to be a compromise.
I don't know where we can get it. I thought when I read Boehner's comments, and I like Speaker Boehner, we get along real well. We're both 49ers, born in the year of 1949. And I'm afraid reading his comments, he's talking about what the Republicans have talked about during the election, of lowering the rates for everybody, which still benefits the richest the most, and then cutting out some of the deductions or exemptions. I don't know how you agreeing on which deductions or exemptions will be very difficult, and I don't think that there's any one of them that doesn't have some good social theory behind it and a powerful interest group behind it. So it'll be tough to do that. And I don't know if that's what he's saying. I hope the compromise could be something like, instead of the 200,000, 250,000 level, that maybe we create a new level of 400,000, 500,000, and we still tax the wealthiest, but maybe you raise that level. At one time, the talk was taxing people over $1 million and not having the Bush tax cuts go to people that earn $1 million a year or more. That to me is outrageous, that people in the area of 500,000 to $1 million get a tax cut, because certainly, even if you're living in New York or San Francisco, where the cost of living is so much greater, you're unbelievably well off, and you've got excess monies that you're not spending and putting in. But if that's where it is, and another issue is the inheritance tax, and if we don't do anything by the end of the year, it'll go back to $1 million exemption, rather than what's right now at $5 million. And what probably should be about $3.5 million. But so there's a lot of compromise to be. We go back on the 13th of November for the lame duck session. I'm hoping that now that there's no desire to eliminate President Obama's reelection, and Mitch McConnell, Senate Minority Leader, was well publicized, it had been republished many times, that he had said our main job is to deny President Obama a second term.
Yes.
That was, when you think about it, you talk about a group playing politics rather than what's good for the country. McConnell said that. They don't have that now. And they don't have to worry about Obama being reelected. He is the president. He's not going to run for office ever again. Without that as a purpose, as wrong as it was,
well, they don't
maybe
have a hostage.
They don't have a hostage. Maybe
That's
they'll
right.
come to the table.
I think you're right on that, because looking ahead with midterms elections, they don't have the hostage. So they're going to have to sit down and compromise, because they don't want to be the party to stop progress. They don't want to be seen as that party.
And they lost. The fact is, even though the election was fairly close, 48% Obama-Romney, in the Electoral College, it wasn't close. It was either 300 and something to 200 something. We don't know about Florida yet.
Right.
So it's 303 or 332 or whatever it be. But in the Senate, pretty much the prognosticators thought the Republicans would take the Senate because so many Democratic seats were up. Each senator runs every 2 years, and they're staggered, so 33% of them were up this time. And there were like 23 Democrat seats and just 10 Republican seats, and people thought because of that 2-to-1 ratio of Democrats up, that we would be beaten. Well, nobody knew that Aiken, a member of the House, would make such an ignorant statement as to talk about legitimate rape as distinguished from illegitimate rape, and take what was, the pollsters were saying was a easy Missouri win, and turn it into a McCaskill win of 55-39. And
Massachusetts.
a landslide.
Yeah.
And then it happened in Massachusetts, where
That's right.
I think that hurt Brown against Elizabeth Warren, but it certainly had a difference in Indiana. Where Murdoch, that's such an interesting race. Joe Donnelly was in my class of 2006. And Joe Donnelly didn't run for re-election to the House because he thought the redistricting was going to cost him his seat. The Republicans redistricted Indiana, and he didn't think he could win. And in fact, I suspect he could have won, but the guy that ran in his seat lost, and it was an upset. It was put by the New York Times in the likely Democrat column, or definitely Democrat column, one or the other, and the Democrat lost by 2 points. Maybe Joe would have lost it too, I doubt it, but he thought he was going to lose it. And obviously they redistricted pretty good for a Republican to win. So Joe just thought, if I'm going to go out after 6 years, I'm going to go out shooting the moon and going for the Senate. His only hope was that Richard Lugar, a man who I got to know through Aspen Institute trips, and Aspen Institute missions or trips are ones that are the most prestigious, and to be invited on those is an honor. And I've been on several Aspen Institute trips, and that's where I got to know Richard Lugar, one of the finest people to ever serve in the Senate, and work with, across the aisle with I think Sam Nunn, to get the treaties with Russia on nuclear missiles, revered in every place we ever went together, and revered around the country. Richard Lugar lost the primary to a Tea Party or Murdoch. Joe knew he couldn't beat Lugar, but he had a chance if Murdoch won. And even after Murdoch won, he didn't really have much of a chance until Murdoch said that he, and his infinitesimal ability to know what God would say, thought God would want a child that was created through a rape to be born, that God would be in favor of that. That's what killed Murdoch, and Joe Donnelly is now going to be in the Senate. So we come back to what happened. They thought they were going to take the Senate. Instead, the Democrats won almost every single seat, took Missouri, which had no chance at, took Indiana, which we thought we had no chance at. John Tester won in Montana, where his opponent, Denny Rarebourg, who was a member of Congress too, and I could tell you, I know Rarebourg, I know Aiken, they had no business being elected to the Senate, and they did very little to contribute in the House. We took every seat possible almost. Chris Murphy, one of my colleagues from the class of 2006, Chris elected in Connecticut. And Chris told me on the floor about a month ago, I joked with him, I'd see him, I'd say, "Hey, Senator." And he told me, he said, "You know, first, you were the first person to ever tell me I was going to be a senator." We went up for the programs where you, after you're first elected, and they have little introductory programs to Congress, orientation. And I saw Chris at the hotel where we were staying there, the Hyatt near the Capitol. And I saw him, and I saw Connecticut. I knew they had kind of older guys, and Lieberman and Dodd. And Chris just looked like the kind of guy that's going to be a senator. I looked at him and said, "You know, you're going to be a United States senator." And to some extent, I think I was reflected on myself. I was 57, and I'd gotten my job in Congress at an older age, and I'm very, very fortunate and happy and satisfied being the 9th District Congressman. But I was looking at him, he was like 31 or 32, and thought, if I got here when I was 31 or 32, like Harold Ford Jr. did at 26, you could go on. Chris is now a United States Senator, but I told him, I said, "You're going to be a United States Senator." Chris Murphy went on from my class. Mazie Hirano from Hawaii from my class is now in the Senate. So in essence, what I'm getting at is I've got now about 12 members of the Senate who serve with me in the House that are Democrats, and a few others that are Republicans.
Strong.
And that increases your ability to work across the other body and to get things done.
Congressman, one other question. What about student loans and the being able to file on bankruptcy?
That's an issue we've had, and we're going to continue working on it. That's the next serious fiscal crisis in this country beyond the home mortgage crisis is so many students who've got loans that they were really subprime loans. People got them to sign loans out not reading the fine print, and they're not dischargeable in bankruptcy because of a bill passed the year before I got to Congress, which is called BAPCISA, which was the Bankruptcy Reform Act, but really did things that the creditors wanted, nothing for the debtors. And it would have been years since they were not dischargeable in bankruptcy. You can discharge credit card loan, you can discharge all kind of debt, but you can't discharge in bankruptcy your student loans. And what we have is a bill to allow these private student loans to be discharged in bankruptcy. Otherwise, people will never get out from underneath the debt. They shouldn't be able to use the borrowing they did when they were in college with the intent to go bankrupt and discharge them later on a fraudulent basis. There should be some criteria established of need. But if they never get out of that debt, they're never going to be able to buy a house. And if they can't buy a first house, the people with first houses won't buy second houses, et cetera, et cetera. And that holds back the whole home building industry and real estate industry and makes builds on the mortgage subprime loans and the derivatives. So that's a major situation. We've got that bill. The president has said we need to do something about it. I plan to work with the president on that. So that's one of the issues we've got, as well as credit check. We're going to continue working our credit check bill to say that you can't use credit checks to deny people jobs. That's been endorsed by the NAACP, all kind of consumer groups. Every study we've seen says credit checks don't determine your honesty or your ability to have a job. And there's so many people without jobs now who've got good talents and good character, but they don't have good credit because they've been let off by major industry who've cut back. And some of it's been because of outsourcing of jobs to India and other places, but Indonesia and wherever, but also just the economy. So we need to pass that bill, and we'll get a hearing. We've had private briefings, but right now we haven't had an opportunity for a hearing in the House side. So that's a bill we've got a major interest in, and we've got to continue looking at our infant mortality issues. And we had the newborn bill and the Affordable Care Act, didn't finally get in because of the reconciliation, but we need to find a pilot project to work on infant mortality. It's a crisis in Memphis, a crisis around the country, and we've done what we can to try to work with the administration. We're going to continue doing that to try to find funds, if we can't do it through legislation, to find funds in the administration to have an infant mortality project here in Memphis.
I know you worked on the federal expungement bill as well, so where are we on that?
Well, again, we haven't had the Republicans aren't as interested, their constituents aren't as affected as much directly, although they're indirectly affected. If people get a record and they can't get a job because they have a record, they're more likely to fall into crime. And Republicans and Democrats both are victims of that crime. We need to get these people and not have them be perpetually on the unemployment rolls, and not have an opportunity to get a second chance, a life, earn a living, and get away from crime. So I've got a bill in that would say that if it's a nonviolent crime and you've gone 7 years without committing another, that you can automatically get your federal conviction if it was a nonviolent offense or a physical offense under a certain threshold, that you can automatically get it expunged and not have that be held against you in trying to get a job, because so many employers will not allow you if you've got a felony. And if it's a nonviolent one, you've gone 7 years with a clean record, you ought to get that chance. There are other people that need that chance too, but this is a beginning, and right now we hadn't had a hearing. But it affects a lot of people in our district and in our country.
Well, with that issue and with the credit issue, I mean, both are clear. We want to encourage people to work, not discourage them. We don't want to scare them away from the workforce. We want to get them in there. That's how you get this economy moving.
I'm going to go to a couple other social issues
that
this election really spoke about in a major way, and it's the changes in America, and how America is changing. One is marijuana laws and the drug war in our country that's gone on for many years and been very expensive and not been successful. And the other is a social issue of gay marriage. In Washington State and the state of Colorado, legalization of marijuana, not medical marijuana, was approved in referendums. And what was it, 55-45, something like that?
Something like that.
In both states. And medical marijuana was approved in Massachusetts, and does that make like the 17th or 18th state with the District of Columbia?
Should know.
I think it's 17 states in D.C. now. And then gay marriage was voted in for the first, I think it's the first time it's ever been voted in by the citizens.
Yeah.
It was in Maine and Maryland. And in the past, where it's been legalized has been by court decision in Iowa, where they tried to remove a judge who had voted in favor of gay marriage, and they failed to do it, which shows that in Iowa the issues changed in perspective. And in Minnesota, they had a prohibition of gay marriage that failed. So we see things changing. As a young person, John, and you're give or take 30, are you 30 now?
30, I turned 30 this year.
How do you see, and I've seen it demographically, but your age group and the people you've seen that are younger and within the margin of error, let's say, how do they view issues like medical marijuana, the war on drugs, or issues about people that are gay?
I think young people, we definitely are taking a more open-minded view on those issues and actually considering all the factors instead of letting our culture and other things interfere. And I think one overarching thing I've noticed with my generation is that we seem, at least for the most part, especially based on our Democratic voting record, to understand that the government needs to get involved in infrastructure, building our bridges, building our schools, everything that
roads, runways, ports,
military.
Dredging, yeah.
I mean, we've got things that we do need tax dollars for. But one place where they don't seem to like government interfering is, the privacy of the bedroom, the privacy of the home. I mean, and when it comes to the marijuana thing, they think that, they get told all these things. And I think it's really important that we're honest with young people about these kind of things too. That while there are some terrible drugs that you did a great job fighting against in the state legislature, I know you were very involved in helping us fight crystal meth, terrible drug. And while they're told horrible things about all drugs, and the thing is when they come to find out that, I see a lot of terrible things happen with alcohol, and that's a legal substance. But when I see, my friends that I know, know about marijuana, they're just not. It's not the same. It doesn't seem to be as dangerous as even alcohol, but even more so, it's not as dangerous as heroin or meth or anything that's dangerous like that. So I think young people have come through just people they know and other things they've seen with their own eyes. They've come to see that one substance is a lot less dangerous than the schedule that's ranked in the federal law. And so the fact that marijuana is a Schedule I drug still is just, I think it's a shocker to most people. The fact, But and actually, the way Colorado promoted its law was really intelligent. The way they pressed it was they said, regulate marijuana like alcohol. And I think that's the right kind of message for them to have gone with. That, and also they were more careful. Oregon, we saw the measure fail because in Oregon, they just did just run wild with it type approach, and the population's not that much in favor of that. But what they did favor was a reasonable and sensible approach where they put in restrictions for people driving under the influence And they also put in restrictions on how much you can have so that people aren't just filling up their houses and everything else with it. Is there anything?
Was it 1 ounce?
I believe it's 1 ounce. I believe that's correct. That might not be it for both states, but I want to say it is. But yeah, that's the whole thing, is that everything has to be done in moderation, and that you don't open floodgates for anything. But if people are responsible with a substance that's safer than alcohol,
and they say they're going to bring in, I think in Washington State, I think it's $5 billion over 10 years in tax revenue.
Definitely.
And Colorado's talking about millions of dollars. This can help. I think one state goes to health care, and one state goes to education.
Education, I believe, yeah.
And it's directed toward there, and it does. And then you don't have your police spending time enforcing possession drug laws, and they can spend that time working on violent crime or other crimes, and you don't have, you've got a legal place where you could buy it, which should take away from the illegal sellers and the cartels who go through those illegal sellers. So it's a tax revenue, it's a savings on law enforcement, and also I guess there could be some degree of control, so you know that whatever you buy is not laced with some other drug.
And this goes back to the issue we were talking about earlier too. You were talking about people getting felonies and not being able to get jobs.
Right.
I mean, we know what the numbers are, as far as when minorities are disproportionately affected by the drug laws, but people in general anybody that's in poverty, when they get charged with one of these crimes or whatever you want to call it, they have to get an attorney. And if you can afford a great attorney, there's a better chance you're going to get that off your record so that you can get that job. But if you're poor and you don't have the information on how to get your way through the court system, you're more likely to be the person that's not going to be able to get that job later on. And that's not what we want. We want to help. We want to give people a hand up, and that situation has been hurting them.
It hurts African Americans disproportionately, and Latinos. Very much so. I think 80-something% of the arrests in New York City, and they had kind of a jump and grab kind of thing, which even Bloomberg's backed off of now, were African American and Hispanic. And that made it more difficult for them later to get jobs. And that's just making a serious mistake. Randy, you were in law enforcement. You've also been in the Navy, in Vietnam.
Shellback.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that we arrived in terms of the legalization of marijuana. I mean, America. I just don't. I have mixed emotions about that. I really do. Maybe because of my military background and maybe because of my law enforcement background. But I think both of y'all present a good argument in terms of the legalization. And then I see a negative side of that. And I would have to watch how this thing pan out. I think with Colorado and how they do it in terms of the regulations that they put out there.
Do you think, one thing I thought about it today, Governor Hickenlooper, and this was a major moment, I think, in American cultural change. He said, now, before we get going with this, I don't want anybody to start eating their Cheetos and some other kind of food. And the direct implication was he was almost like tongue-in-cheek that these people that are smoking the marijuana will end up eating some of these kind of snack foods, munchy foods, and didn't want you to start eating these things. Will this conflict with Michelle Obama's war against obesity? Is there an obesity battle coming up against the understanding that the war on drugs has failed?
I hope not.
Maybe this will give American entrepreneurs the encouragement to come up with something that tastes good but is less filling.
Well, that is, and another thing is too, making healthier food cheaper. I mean, that's a bigger problem in my opinion. But yeah.
Yeah, we're getting back to marijuana.
Carrots, and celery are never going to take the place of ice cream and donuts.
I just worry about our young people. When you start talking drugs, marijuana, I worry about our young people, those kids who are in school.
But you know what I get, Randy, from so many young people? And there was my friend Michael Wolf, I was with is up in New York, and I said something about these issues with his kids, and they don't smoke marijuana, but they're 14 and 16. And they said, yeah, marijuana's not a big deal. He said, but the other drugs are. And if you tell us marijuana is, then why should we believe you about the other drugs? If you're not straight with the kids, and the DEA agent I questioned, the head of the DEA and the head of the FBI, they couldn't name and never will be able to name any person who's ever died because of the use of marijuana. But people do die because of meth. People do die because of
That's
crack.
true.
People do die from overdoses of cocaine, and they die from heroin. And unless you can distinguish, you put them all in the same class, and marijuana's right now class 1, then the government's really, and the kid smokes marijuana and realizes, oh, I kind of enjoyed that record. The music seemed a little different to me, and I sure liked eating that ice cream. And the government tells them all drugs are bad. They're more likely to go on to cocaine or crack and think the government's not telling me the truth. The government is giving them the truth about crack and cocaine and meth and heroin. And I'm not saying in any way that anybody should be, especially under 21, but when you're 21, there is a freedom thing in this country, which the Republican Party, and we kind of started this with the Republicans, are supposed to embrace freedom. They're for freedom when it comes time to have economic issues and keep your dollars and not share them as if we are a family, and know that if the lesser among us don't prosper and get opportunity, that the upper folks won't have opportunity too. And as Oliver Wendell Holmes said, taxes is the price you pay to be in civilization. But when it comes time to personal issues like the bedroom, and there were sodomy laws, it was against the law, no longer, but because of Supreme Court cases.
Virginia versus Loving.
The Virginia versus Loving on who you could marry racially, and now the next step is sexual orientation. These areas of freedoms, the Republicans don't embrace as well in general, and they've become intolerant and wanting the government. And Democrats have been afraid to go with them too. But I think that freedom, and I know there's somebody out there on Walnut Grove. I think it's one of the Malmos. Had a Gary Johnson for president libertarian sign. Libertarians are pretty consistent on these issues, which the national political parties otherwise are not so consistent. But I think there's a certain freedom thing. Once you're 21, if there's not a real harm to society, the state should determine whether it's legal or not. And that's what I sponsored with Barney Frank and Ron Paul, both of whom are gone, now retired, two lions of the Congress from different perspectives, but great leaders. That the states should regulate marijuana like they do alcohol. And if the state doesn't think it should be legal, that's the state's business. But if they do, they should, and they should tax it. And we should see, as Brandeis said, laboratories of democracy, does it work? And it was kind of the same thing with the lottery. You know, it took me forever to get the lottery passed in Tennessee, and we saw Georgia pass it, and we saw Kentucky pass it, and we saw Missouri pass it. But first was California and Massachusetts and New Hampshire. I think New Hampshire was first. The eastern states and the Midwestern and the South was last. And Tennessee was near the last. But everybody knows now lotteries are not hurting society, and they're helping society. And in Tennessee, the scholarship is a great good for people that need to go to college.
It is.
And get that with a Pell Grant and a Hope Scholarship, you can go to school in Tennessee and not come out with debt if you make your grades.
I think once again, I mean, it's just really important that we're honest. We got to present the facts. Like I love your example there with the young kids and the information they get. I think it's really good to tell them the truth about something, and I think it's good to be straightforward with them so that they'll listen to you when you stress something that we should all be stressing, and that's moderation. I mean, obviously, your health's going to be worse if you eat one Big Mac or if you drink one beer, you do anything like that. Your health is not going to be as good. But if you're going to do it anyways, and it's legal, then, I mean, that's when you stress moderation. I mean,
Are you talking Big Macs, or are you talking?
I'm talking Big Macs right now. But that applies to everything, really. I mean, you want moderation in everything. I think that's a really important thing in our society when it comes to, especially things that you're putting into your body.
Well, you know, and then gender issues or sexual orientation issues. I didn't vote for the ban on gay marriage in our Constitution, and was one of the few people that didn't. I didn't see and don't see discriminating against people. And I saw that as a political effort, which it was, by the Republicans to bring their vote out at the ballot box with that amendment to help their candidates. They were using that social issue to get certain religious folks out to vote. And once they voted, that was their voter turnout. And if they encouraged those people to vote and waved that in front of them, then they could get them to vote for their candidates to boot. In fact, the opposition to the lottery, Ambassador Rogers, who headed up the opposition, said that one of the things they wanted to do was to try to use that opposition in the conservative churches to get members out to vote against the lottery, thinking they would then vote for Van Hillary for governor, and they were using that. They didn't care about the issue as much as they wanted to use it as a vehicle to get people to vote for the Republican governor so they could benefit financially. Well, it didn't work. The lottery passed, and the lottery was so far ahead of most of the politicians. I mean, I had people tell me, Chancellor Gee at Vanderbilt, Joe Rogers, a lot of people that thought they were in the know. This will never pass. Oh, you won't pass this. And I knew from my going through the state and talking to people and knowing what people were thinking and knowing how many people went to Missouri to buy tickets and went to Kentucky to buy tickets and out of Chattanooga to Georgia, that it would pass. And it did. And the same thing with marijuana, medical marijuana. I knew that the people in my district and the state of Tennessee, from talk and from polling, were much more advanced and progressive in understanding than the quote-unquote leadership and the politicians who always lag on these issues because they don't have the guts to be ahead of the wave. I've always tried to be ahead of the wave and know that I was on the lottery. I was on parimutuel gaming, even though we never got a horse track here, and I was on medical marijuana, which in Arkansas was 52 to 48. If they would have had a Steve Cohen in Arkansas to come out and talk on that issue, it would have passed.
It would have passed.
But people were afraid to be leaders. It'll pass the next time. And it would pass in Tennessee. Tennessee's not any different than Arkansas. It'll pass if it gets to the ballot box. But there's not people in the legislature sufficiently aware enough to put it to the people in a referendum.
No, I completely.
But let me ask you this about gay marriage.
Sure.
When I first saw it, and I think the legislature should decide, Tennessee's legislature will not today and may not ever approve gay marriage. But it should be to the legislature representing the people to determine, and not the Constitution of the legislature that I was a member of 6 or 12 years ago, that makes it impossible. The Constitution shouldn't have banned it. The legislature should be able to do it. And that was an issue besides the discrimination issue. But let me ask you, when I grew up, and Randy, when you grew up, we're about the same age. You're a little older.
Right.
I know I didn't know anybody who I knew or who said they were gay. In high school, in junior high school, maybe in college, there might have been a fellow or two that we kind of knew was gay, but hardly any. We just didn't know it. Mm-hmm. John, your age, is it pretty common to know people in college and in wherever that are gay?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say in high school, it was when I was in high school, which was a while back now. I graduated in 2001 from Germantown High School, but when I was there, I mean, I don't remember it too much there, but I do remember meeting people that were gay. And then I knew when I went into college, in fact, when I was rebuilding the College Democrats at the University of Memphis, one of the top groups that were involved with my organization were the Stonewall Tigers. And they were very vocal. And I think a lot of it's not just, I think maybe, I don't want to give our culture and media too much credit, but I think television shows, much like the Cosbys helped, and other shows helped, and I should go much further back than Cosby's, part of the Jeffersons and some other shows, but helped bring African American culture into people's television sets. I think television shows also helped people that were gay at home that maybe were afraid to come out at the time much more comfortable speaking about who they were and how they felt.
And polls show people younger are much more in favor
Definitely.
of gay marriage and legalization. And so it's a trend. It's happened. It's going to happen. It's just how much people can hold it back.
It's a good trend, too. This is what I was going to say a while ago. There's not enough rich people in the country to put the Republicans in office every term. And they had to find a way to get poor, especially poor white voters, to support them. And gay marriage and abortion and other issues like that were the driving tools for that. But I do think that it's finally starting to... People are waking up and realizing those aren't the important issues. I grew up and was born and raised in Memphis, but for 1 year, because of a family issue, I moved up to Troy, Tennessee, and lived up there. And one of my friends I met up there was Ron Wagner, and he's still a buddy of mine I keep up with, but he's a country boy in Savannah, Tennessee, and he called me before this election, just to talk to me about it. He didn't tell me who he's voting for or anything, but he wanted to talk to me about it. And he goes, "I keep hearing people bring up the gay marriage issue," and he says, I don't care. He's like, he's a devout religious person. He doesn't, believe in it or whatever. But he says that has nothing to do with me. He says, at the end of the day, John, if I vote for President, Obama, or if I vote for Mitt Romney, which one's going to help my family more? And I said, well, Ryan, do you and your wife make over $250,000 a year? And he said, no. And I said, well, there's your answer.
We've talked about the social issues for a goodly while, and that was an important part of the election, but something we hadn't talked about, which we need to talk about. You brought up the Supreme Court, which was important, and it relates to women and campaign finance, and Randy, you brought up the fiscal cliff and taxes and fairness, but the Affordable Care Act is now, because of President Obama's election, the law of the land. If Romney would have been elected, it's possible it could have been repealed. Certainly the House would have repealed it. I don't know about this Senate, but it's a possibility. But there's certain administrative actions that could have been taken to thwart it. That's not going to happen. Now, the Affordable Care Act, certainly my proudest vote as a congressperson is the law of the land. America enters with all of the other developed industrialized nations of the world of having a national health care program. Donut hole will be filled. Donut hole will be filled. Preventative care, no copays. Young people on their parents' insurance till they're 26. Pre-existing conditions, not a reason to deny you insurance. You can all get insurance. No yearly caps on insurance, no lifetime caps on insurance. More community health centers, more incentives to get family docs by relieving debt to go into inner cities and or rural areas to provide health care. More physician assistants and nurses to get more opportunity to serve, small businesses to get help in providing insurance for their employees, exchanges in the states to make it more affordable to get insurance, insurance companies having to give a certain percentage back to premiums to pay their premiums, their premium holders for a care rather than taking the money in executive salary and advertising. As the president said, insurance reform on steroids. That's the law now.
It is.
Big change, and big for people in Tennessee and Memphis. And the other thing we hadn't talked about, which is important, and John, it just should be something that gets you turned on. The planet.
Environment.
Global warming has a person in the White House who understands that global warming is occurring, rather than somebody in Romney who was going to deny that global warming is occurring and was going to put it off. While he says he was concerned about the future generations' debt they were going to inherit, and we're all concerned about the debt, but we have to do it fairly, he wasn't concerned about the changes in climate. More Hurricane Sandys, more Katrinas, more heat waves like we had this year, the hottest summer on record. And around the world it means droughts, and that means real trouble.
Definitely. It was actually an issue that was pretty much ignored. It almost felt ignored on the campaign trail, but President Obama made sure to get it in there some. And that's the future. You're right, the whole planet. You can't really say it a much better way than that.
You go back, not only just President Obama, but you can go back to Vice President Al Gore.
Al Gore, definitely.
He laid it out in his documentary, which he was receiving an award on that documentary about global warming.
But there are people that don't believe it and deny it. 99 out of 100 scientists say it's true and it's happening. And some of these Republicans will take that one scientist and say, oh, we don't need to be doing that. We need to be concerned about our carbon footprint. That's what's going on with the XL pipeline. And if we release the tar sands in Canada, and that's a very anti-carbon saving process to get those tar sands, it releases a lot of energy into the atmosphere, a lot of carbon, and then it ships that carbon through our country, the tar sands, and what could be dangerous to our environment going through middle America. But the whole purpose is to send it to China. It's not for our energy, and it could despoil our mid part of America's farmland and reservoirs, because it goes right over the most extensive water reservoir in the middle part of the country, and it releases these tar sands, the carbon when you get the tar sands. One of the more respected scientists, a Nobel Prize winner, said, it's lighting the fuse on a carbon bomb, and the fight to save the planet would be over. So there's a chance we can do something with the XL pipeline. There's a chance we can do something with tar sands and preserve our environment. So, I mean, there's so many areas. This election is so important. The Supreme Court, the Affordable Care Act, the environment, global warming, the deficit, fairness, justice, programs that help people with weatherization, public schools, public education, aid for dependent children, food stamps, Pell Grants. They won't be on the cutting block inordinately, which they would have been otherwise at the expense of the credits we give, tax credits for oil companies and defense spending that even the Department of Defense doesn't want to have.
Well, we're grateful that you're going back because you generate seniority now. I mean, you've always had a voice, but you have a bigger voice.
I will be in the upper half, at least, of the members of Congress. I do move up the ranks. Seniority means a lot in Congress. It means a lot in terms of what access you get to leadership and what priority you get in speaking and in having bills heard. And also it has to do with the knowledge you have of the process and the relationships you've established. I have those relationships and knowledges in the House that every year I get more versed and aware of. And now in the Senate, when I first went up there, I knew Lamar, Alexander, and Bob Corker and got along well with them. But now, as I say, I've got 12 or 14 colleagues I've worked with and people I've met. And some of these have been Aspen Institute trips where I've gotten to know Richard Lugar, who's no longer there, but Sherrod Brown and Barbara Boxer, and through other activities like this, I've gotten to know other senators, and that gives you opportunities to call them on the phone to get something done. So yeah, I look forward to going back to the lame duck. I look forward to going back to the next Congress, the 113th, and I've already talked to my staff in Washington. Let's try to find some money to help get buses in Whitehaven, rapid bus transit. Let's try to stay on top of that Tiger Grant with Mike Carpenter and make sure that gets done and we get a groundbreaking in 2014 like we intend to. And let's look for everything. I had Michael Fulton put a dear colleague together. Let's try to get the post office and not have them have to pay disproportionately as they have for their health care, their pensions, into a fund and reverse that and get the post office to where they're not suffering as much as they have been. And I'm going to talk to each staff member, and we're working every day. I've talked about the federal government and its role with Washington and Colorado. And we're going to be involved, and there'll be areas where with people like Ron Paul and Barney Frank and Howard Berman not being in Congress, I have the opportunity to step up and take a leadership role in issues.
That's good. That's very good because seniority does plays that role. I was talking with Roby Williams and Luke, and they were very appreciative for the minority center. I mean, that was the first. And a lot of people, Congressman, they want to know the role of that minority center. Can you just...
We've got it, just to wrap it up, and it does. Yeah. It's going to be great. It's going to give minorities, which is women, African Americans, Latinos, access to contracts and access to capital. And the office is going to be, it's down there at Luke Yancey's office, but it's a separate office, and it's a first in Tennessee, and I was happy to bring it working with the administration. And I'm going to work for the administration for all other kind of things. And Randy and the office in Memphis are going to continue giving those good constituent serviers. 544-4131's our office. We got a big veterans lunch coming up on Veterans, Monday the 12th.
Bridges.
At Bridges. We got to get out of time. John Merrick, thank you for your help in the campaign and for being on. Randy, thank you for everything. Thank you for your votes. Thank you for your support. I appreciate the opportunity to represent you. I'm Congressman Steve Cohen. This has been Congressional Report.